and I'll confirm it's on the website as well.
Okay.
You are live.
Thank you, Kathy. So good evening. My name is Peter Murphy from the Sydney Politics in the Pub. I'm the MC tonight. So welcome everybody. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm sitting, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay respect to their elders past and present. I warmly welcome any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander participants here tonight. Because of the Sydney Public Health Orders, Hotel Harry, while it is open, is really unable to host us physically because of the size of the bookings allowed. And so we're holding this session completely online. Welcome to everyone who's been able to join. If you want to put a question or make a comment for the Q&A part of the program, you will need to use the chat facility in YouTube. You can find this by clicking on the promo slide, or you've done that already, and then you have to sign into YouTube and then use the chat function. So tonight's topic, it's modern monetary theory. Is it a snake oil or showing how to fund a good society? Modern monetary theory has been popularized ever since the 2008 global financial crisis heralded zero or negative interest rates, central banks buying trillions of government bonds, and even talk of helicopter money and a universal basic income. It got a new boost with Australia's JobKeeper and JobSeeker programs last year, and it may well turn up in the coming federal election campaign. But it does sound mathematical and obscure. To help us have a real discussion about modern monetary theory this evening, we've got two great speakers. The first is Wayne McMillan. He's a poet, a writer, a bushwalker, and he has a couple of sheepdogs. But he's also a retired public servant and a staunch unionist. He worked in both the Commonwealth and state governments and specialised in public finance, public policy and taxation. He's a member of the New South Wales Public Service Association, retired branch, active in the Australian Fabians, Economic Reform Australia, and the Centre for the Advancement of a Steady State Economy, New South Wales chapter. And our second speaker is Frank Stilwell, a political economist at the University of Sydney, well known to audiences at Sydney Politics in the Pub. Along with Ted Wheelwright, Margaret Power, Evan Jones and Gavin Butler, and thousands of students, he helped establish an independent political economy department at the University of Sydney. His research interests include theories of political economy, urbanisation and regional development, inequality, Australian economic policy and the nature of work. And his textbooks are standard teaching material for all students, university students in Australia studying in the field of political economy. And I think he's taken a crash course in MMT for tonight as well. So Wayne and Frank will each speak for 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll move to the question and answer session through to our 7:15 finishing time. So without any further ado, I'd like to invite Wayne to switch on his microphone and let's get going with this really interesting topic. Thanks, Wayne.
Thanks, Peter. Good evening, everyone. I would like to first of all say that I'm located tonight on Darug land, and I want to acknowledge and show respect for the past, present and emerging Darug leaders. Always was, always will be Darug land. Let's say when Frank first contacted me for a speaker to talk at Politics in the Pub on MMT, I had reservations considering the title of the talk was rather cheeky. I thought MMT, the reservations considering that talk, the best person probably to do that talk was the developer, Bill Mitchell from the University of Newcastle. And as Bill was unable to make it, I decided that I should put my hand up despite my glaring deficiencies. I can honestly say I was humbled and honoured by Frank's request. The opportunity to be able to discuss MMT with one of Australia's greatest political economists is something I couldn't refuse under any circumstances. Before I talk a little about the practical implications of MMT, I want to say a few words about my fellow speaker, Frank Stilwell. Professor Frank Stilwell has made outstanding contributions to the study of economics and its teaching in Australia. His lists of publications cover everything, as Peter mentioned, from competing frameworks and paradigms in economics to one of the first Australian books ever published on urban and regional economics, and several works on inequality. Frank's subtle influence on many economists now inside and outside of Australia includes Steve Keen, who is standing for the Senate next year, for the elections held next year, and a young and up-and-coming MMTer in the USA named Rowan Gray. Many people might not know this, but Frank also plays a mean blues guitar and has one of the most impressive collections of blues records I've ever seen. I'm also told by Bill and Frank that they once played together. That's Bill Mitchell and Frank, played together in a band. So they've known one another for quite a long time. Okay, enough about blues stars and guitar players. Let's get down to the purpose of my talk, and that is to give a short but significant introduction to modern monetary theory, MMT. When thinking about MMT and its macroeconomic implications, I feel it's important to let the audience know that I was raised in a Western Sydney post-war housing commission suburb, left school at 15 with no qualifications, and experienced periods of unemployment firsthand in the 1970s. My journey to some cogent economic understanding about the causes and remedies for unemployment has been a long, interesting, and arduous one, but nevertheless very worthwhile. For me, it started with personal reading, doing courses with the now defunct trade union training authority on economics, Sydney Technical College, doing a welfare work course with an economics component, and finally finishing up at Sydney University. After leaving university, I followed the work of two Australian economists that I believe really understood the most about the phenomenon of unemployment and employment. That was Bill Mitchell and Raja Jananka. And I think I learned quite a bit more from studying the work that they did over the years. What are the most real important deficits that Australia faces today? I believe we have serious environmental, educational, housing, health, and employment deficits. Should we be overly concerned at the moment about our federal public fiscal deficit? I believe the answer is a definite no. Surely you say we can't keep on racking up public debt, living beyond our means. Won't our children and our grandchildren have to pay off the debt in the future with higher taxes? Let's start first with budgets. A household, a state, or local government isn't able to spend beyond its income or incoming revenue unless it borrows, maxes out the credit card, gets a loan from the bank, or sells off some of its assets. So it's natural that we think our national government is exactly the same. What makes a federal government like ours different to a household, a state government, or local government? Well, our government is what is called a sovereign currency issuer. This means it can issue any amount of fresh new money into our economy at any time it sees fit via our Reserve Bank. When our federal government spends, it gets the Reserve Bank to compute a key in certain given amounts into private bank accounts. We are currency users and we pay our taxes in the currency issued by our federal government. How do we get the currency to pay our taxes? Well, the government has to spend that currency first into the economy via our Central Reserve Bank. Australia's national government is like the USA, the UK and Japan. It has full monetary sovereignty. So it has great fiscal policy space into which it can spend. What is full monetary sovereignty? This is when a federal government taxes and collects all revenues, fees, etc. in its own currency, has no foreign loans, sets its own interest rates, and has a free floating exchange rate. We must remember that monetary sovereignty is like a spectrum. Some countries have full monetary sovereignty and great fiscal policy space or spending capacity, and some have very less or very little. If a nation's currency isn't free floating or is pegged to another currency, or they have loans in foreign currency, or they have multiple interest rates, then their fiscal policy space is restricted. At this stage of my talk, some of you must be scratching your heads thinking, no federal government can just keep on spending infinitum, and you would be right. There are limits to federal spending, and this is determined by our economy. If we have all of our economy's capital equipment, raw materials, plant and machinery fully utilised to maximum capacity, and there is no unemployment, underemployment, then we have reached our spending limits. To go beyond those limits would be inflationary and not conducive to economic prosperity. MMT recognises that before we spend on any program or project, we must check or vet for resource constraints across sectors to ensure we prevent inflationary pressures. So we now know that our federal government can always spend before it taxes by creating new money via computer keystrokes from the Reserve Bank into different bank accounts for procurement contracts and Centrelink payments. It doesn't need taxes to initiate that spending. We also know that it's resource constraints in our economy that determine what we can do fiscally, not the need for borrowings or taxes. Well, you might say you haven't dealt with the problem of growing public sector debt from successive deficits and the future impacts on our economy. Some economists believe growing public debt crowds out private sector investment by raising interest rates. My recent study of the empirical evidence on this topic suggests the opposite, that growing public sector debts when an economy is in a downturn crowd in private investment by lowering interest rates. In addition, the argument from economists like Robert Barrow that tell us that growing public debts will have to be paid off in the future by higher taxes by our grandchildren just isn't true. The Ricardian equivalence theorem just doesn't really stack up. Spending on social and economic infrastructure now that will be used by our children and grandchildren in the future benefits us now and benefits future generations. There is no evidence that higher taxes will have to be paid in the future to offset present infrastructure costs. What is a federal fiscal deficit and surplus? We're told by mainstream economists that a fiscal deficit is when a federal government spends beyond its collected revenue, and a surplus is when a government has raised greater revenue or savings than it has spent. In effect, though, when a federal government creates a fiscal deficit, the private sector, which we are part of, receives a surplus of funds, and the opposite applies when the federal government creates a surplus. So deficits or surpluses aren't intrinsically good or bad. And to be honest, the fiscal history of Australia indicates that we have been over 75% of the time in fiscal deficit. If the coalition government hadn't recently abandoned its aspiration for a surplus and spent into the economy, then Australia would have been in a serious recession. You can now see that if our federal government maintains a surplus during an economic downturn, that is, practices fiscal austerity, our private sector will be in fiscal deficit. If the government doesn't spend into the economy so that the unemployed or low wage have funds to buy goods and services from private businesses, then the economy will spiral into a severe recession. When an economy is in recession and we have unemployment or underemployment, deficits will be necessary until the private sector is willing to hire. When businesses choose not to invest and hire, but put their available funds into savings, then governments must spend into the economy. Private employers aren't going to hire until they receive considerable fresh orders from their customers. And so our federal government needs to spend into the economy to create aggregate demand by consumers for goods and services. What can we do in the interim for those workers waiting to be hired? Well, any worker who wants to work like I did when I became redundant in 1973 and 1974 should have a job guarantee. Our federal government could absorb a lot of unemployment by creating more essential service jobs in the public sector and by maintaining a small but ongoing job guarantee program. This program would have a minimum socially acceptable wage and decent working conditions, plus leave and super. This socially acceptable wage then becomes a wage price anchor or floor to deal with inflationary pressures and ensure private sector employers can't drive down wages and working conditions below the minimum socially acceptable wage. This job guarantee program operates like a buffer stock, and when the economy picks up, some of the job guarantee workers will be lured away by higher wages and hence job prospects in the private sector. Now you may be thinking, well, if a federal sovereign currency issuing government can always spend without taxing, what is the purpose of taxation? Well, taxes take money out of the economy so they can inhibit inflationary pressures. Taxes like a wealth tax or progressive income tax redistribute income, and they stop wealthy individuals from buying and or hoarding resources that could be better used for the common good by taking available funds away from them. Taxes are also helpful in reducing or inhibiting certain individual and corporate behaviours that are bad for our health or environment. Smoking and pollution are classic examples. All of these topics I mentioned and more are covered by modern monetary theory. In a nutshell, MMT, modern monetary theory, creates a handy lens for us from which we can see the importance and impact of money across monetary systems. It shows us how money is created, how it flows through the real economy, and how we can use the power of the public purse for the common good. It also provides a real description on how the federal government actually spends via Treasury and how the Reserve Bank and the private banks operate, interact, and coordinate operations, processes, and procedures. In essence, MMT helps us see macro monetary reality. Our national government can always spend into the economy when resources haven't been fully utilised and there is unemployment. The main issue isn't about a lack of funds, but real resource restraints. We don't have to rely on taxation to spend. MMT doesn't claim to be a panacea for all economic ills, but it certainly gives us a clear message that when we are talking about monetary and fiscal policy, we are talking about balancing an economy, not a budget. A good book to introduce yourself to MMT is The Deficit Myth, Modern Monetary Theory and the Birth of the People's Economy by Stephanie Kelton. In addition, Bill Mitchell's blog, Billy Blog, contains a plethora of fascinating discussions on all aspects of macroeconomics, seen through the lens of modern monetary theory. If you want more detailed in comprehensive technical information. The book Macroeconomics by William Mitchell, L. Randall Wray, and Martin Watts will do the trick. Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Thank you very much, Wayne. That was a very gentle introduction to this topic. Let's see where we go with Frank. So first of all, thanks again to you. And now I'll hand over to Frank Stilwell. Off you go, Frank.
Thanks very much, Peter, and thank you, Wayne, for a very clear exposition of modern monetary theory. I've been reading over the last couple of days the book by Stephanie Kelton called The Deficit Myth, to which you referred, and I find it a marvelously accessible and persuasive set of reasons why, in particular, we should challenge, as in the title of the book, the deficit myth. Think about it here in Australia, what we've lived through over the last, particularly the last 30 years or so, is a succession of federal treasurers telling us that good things that we would like to have happen, better health, better public services, better transport infrastructure, better policies to embrace climate change, these things can't be afforded. In other words, the argument has been typically that government should balance the budget, or better still, run a budget surplus, because then there'd be like a business that's making a profit, and that's surely a good thing, is it not? I think, Wayne, you've very clearly explained the fallacy in that reasoning, and frankly, it shouldn't need to be laboured as hard as it now must be, I think, but because it was always a fetish, a budget deficit fetishism rather than sound economic reasoning. And I've come to see that modern monetary theory is actually a very good way of explaining just what is happening in the financial sector and in the processes by which governments fund their own expenditures. It has I don't regard it so much as a theory, but as a description of what's actually going on out there. But more than that, it also, I think, opens up some opportunities for what you call more fiscal space, more opportunities for doing good things through the use of government expenditure. So in answer to the general question of the topic, is modern monetary theory snake oil or showing how to fund a good society? I think I have to admit to being a convert from the former position to the latter. Like most economists of my generation, I was brought up on Keynesian economics. Now, this was almost the definition of sensible economics. On the political right, you had the more extreme neoclassical theory, which said all governments should really not interfere with markets except in particularly problematic circumstances. And on the left, of course, you had the Marxian tradition in political economy, saying that, well, government intervention of the Keynesian type may help to stabilize capitalism, but it doesn't address its fundamental contradictions. It doesn't create a more equitable society. It'll never be a road to socialism. And Keynes always sort of seemed to occupy that sensible middle ground. And I think one can see that augmented with the insights from modern monetary theory, that position becomes further strengthened. In other words, it may be a route, if we can't escape from capitalism, it may be a route whereby we actually get a better capitalism, one that is more attuned to meeting social needs, whether it's for health, education, climate action, or whatever. So I don't regard it as sort of an exciting road to nirvana, but given that we're here trapped within a capitalist society with all its tendencies to inequality, to instability, insecurity, unsustainability, this gives us, and should give right across the spectrum of political views, some pragmatic basis for dealing with these problems through reform rather than through revolutionary transformation. So you can see I'm somewhat divided here myself in how I respond to this. I would like to see some more fundamental transformations in our social order, but I do think politically that modern monetary theory might help us get on the right road rather than stay in this terrible prison of successive governments shackled by this budget fetishism that prevents good things happening. So my answer is clearly not stake oil. It is a description of what's going on out there, and it can be a means of funding a route to a better society. And as such, I think it opens up an agenda. Indeed, Stephanie Kelton in her book says, let's stop worrying about the budget deficit of governments and deal with the real social deficits that need to be addressed. Her list is the deficit of good jobs, the deficit in adequate savings that many households have to grapple with when trying to deal with risks and provision for retirement, the deficits in healthcare, in education, particularly problematic in the United States, where Kelton comes from, the deficits in infrastructure, broadband, water treatment, public transport, and so forth, and of course, the huge deficit in expenditure on climate change. And Kelton has worked with, in the United States, with Democrat leaders, in particular with Bernie Sanders, in helping to develop a Green New Deal as a vibrant alternative to the terrible disasters of the Trump presidency and a road forward. Now, although Biden hasn't explicitly embraced a Green New Deal, a lot of his policies are of that same kind. So Bernie Sanders might not have got the presidential nomination of the party, but a lot of the policies that he and modern monetary theorists like Stephanie Kelton were working on are coming to fruition, at least in part. So there's some good news here, which I think we can build on and certainly keep the pressure on governments to go further down this road. I mean, think of that awesome parade of treasurers we've had to endure here in Australia. Peter Costello, I have to say Wayne Swan, even though he was a Labor treasurer, was as mired in budget deficit fetishism as any of the Liberals. He did some good things, but in this respect, his constant promise of getting the budget back into surplus as a priority goal was just bunkum. And of course, since then, we've had other horrible treasurers like Joe Hockey and his notoriously draconian budget, Scott Morrison, and so on and so forth. There's no sign of a turning point other than the force of circumstances. The great political economist John Kenneth Galbraith always used to say, ultimately, it's the march of circumstances that proves decisive. And here we are in a COVID recession that was caused governments, let's face it, the objective economic conditions required that governments engage in major rescue packages. The JobKeeper, most obviously, but also increases in the job seeker rate effectively, albeit only temporarily, massive subsidies to businesses, some of which they didn't need and are keeping, even though there's plenty of evidence now that they've just pocketed it to increase their profits during these difficult times. But it seemed suddenly that the budget deficit problem had disappeared, or at least it wasn't as problematic as we'd been led to believe. In fact, I was watching the television the other day, and the financial report was coming on and talking about what was the cost of the pandemic in terms of the Australian government expense, mind-bogglingly huge sums. In previous years, we thought of a budget deficit annually of 30 billion as pretty high. Now we're talking in the hundreds of billions. But as Alan Kohler, who was giving this financial report, pointed out, at the very time that it was revealed that the pandemic had cost the Australian government an extra $310 billion in expenditure, he pointed out that, well, lo and behold, the federal, the Reserve Bank of Australia has bought exactly that amount of government bonds. How remarkable is that? I mean, Alan Kohler, in his rather witty way, left the matter hanging, saying, oh, is that a coincidence? Well, I think not. I mean, if we talk about how do governments finance, to use the conventional language, how do governments finance their expenditure, they can do so through the issue of bonds. Now, modern monetary theorists would say that's the other way around. It's the issue of the bonds that creates the injection into the private sector of the economy, which increases spending capacity and gives a boost to economic growth. Well, this is exactly what's happening. But of course, when interest rates are approximately zero and the Reserve Bank's bank rate is only just slightly above zero, there's no scope to expand the economy through the normal monetary policy means of lowering the cash rate. So this injection of funds through, well, it's a form of quantitative easing, as it's come to be known since the global financial crash of 2008, is the way to go. It's a practical application of modern monetary theory. And as you correctly say, Wayne, it's kept Australia out of a deep recession. If I'm a pragmatic kind of economist, I like to see what works. And this works. The evidence is in. We've managed to avoid a recession, just as in a rather different context in the global financial crash of 2008, major increases in government expenditure there, building better schools program, the home insulation program, household payments, helped to keep the economy buoyant during a period when we'd have otherwise been facing massive unemployment. So I guess the conclusion that I come to is that economic theories are always many and varied, but if you apply the test of what works, it seems that modern monetary theory is an approach to understanding the economy and prescribing policy whose time has come. Time has come. In an era where we're facing major shocks, whether it be through the sort of collapse of the financial system that occurred in 2008, or was a result of the closure of a lot of business activities for health reasons during the recent and current pandemic, the capacity to deal with those shocks means that we have to resort to these kinds of injections of expenditure to keep the economy going, and there's no problem in financing them. Now, this, I think, is a great step forward and needs to be widely recognised. Of course, key questions are, well, exactly how much is possible? There are resource constraints, so we can only work within the existing resources, natural, manufactured, human resources that we've got. If we push beyond that, we will get inflationary tendencies, and that would blow the strategy out of the water if it became excessive. Most economists think that an annual inflation rate of about 2 or 3% is perfectly tolerable, but you don't want to get much above that. Otherwise, in the extreme, you can get into the hyperinflation situation, whereby the currency becomes significantly devalued, bordering on the worthless, as happened in Germany in the 1920s, helping to create the economic conditions that Hitler exploited in his rise to power. So there's all sorts of looming threats if you go down the road of increasing inflation. So let me conclude on that point by simply saying, well, here is a theory that's been around a long while. In fact, I've been a subscriber to the Economic Reform Australia newsletter, the ERA Review, ever since it started back in, I think it was 1993. We hadn't heard of modern monetary theory then, but there were people here in Australia, even before Bill Mitchell was developing this argument, who were saying, well, look, we shouldn't be constrained by conventional thinking about funding government deficits. We should be asking the Reserve Bank of Australia to buy government bonds to finance whatever needs to be done. That was the principal analytical proposition that brought people together to form Economic Reform Australia in 1993. And that was before Warren Mosler, Randy Ray and others, and Bill Mitchell here in Australia, started promulgating MMT as a new way of thinking about the economy. So we've got a good track record. We just need to break through so that this isn't seen as an interlude, a way of dealing with this exceptional circumstances of the pandemic, but becomes embedded in the normal thinking about economic policy so that we can get on with the serious business of improving the nation's infrastructure and in particular, developing a Green New Deal, because the time is right for that and it's not going to go away. The problems are going to intensify unless the policies are ramped up. Policies of sort of green Keynesianism, whereby government expenditure can drive the expansion of industries, creating green jobs, using renewable energies resources as we scale back on the industry sectors that are unsustainable for our ecological future. This is the time for a Green New Deal, and the financing of it can learn much from the principles of modern monetary theory.
Thank you very much, Frank. You done there?
Yep.
Great. Okay. So again, on behalf of our audience there, I want to express my warm appreciation to both Wayne and Frank for their elucidation of this topic, which isn't easy to get your head around, but you can see how relevant it really is to our situation. So let's go into the Q&A. I've got quite a few comments, which I hope both Frank and Wayne can see in their chat section, but we'll start with the first one, who claims to be an independent outsider. Funding needed services is always an issue. Is the issue the method of funding or the inequality, the disparity of wealth? I'm not sure that MMT or cryptocurrency will change anything regarding the dominance of the 1%. So how would you go? Just responding to that one point.
Yeah, let me just make a point about the disparity of wealth. There's nothing within the MMT reasoning that would overcome that other than the disparities that result from unemployment. Clearly, the MMT, if it leads to the introduction of a job guarantee, would be a good measure for reducing poverty that results from unemployment. But beyond that, I don't actually see MMT as really redressing the broader challenge of creating a more equitable society. Indeed, there's a certain little irony in why politicians of both the left and right, I think, still subscribe to the budget fetishism that I've earlier described. Those on the right want to cut the welfare payments and can say, oh, government can't afford this growing volume of expenditures. And those on the political left are attracted to the budget deficit myth because it's a good reason for taxing the rich. In other words, rather than cutting welfare, we should be funding the necessary public services by higher taxes on the rich. Well, I'm in the latter camp, and I've commonly argued that position in the past. But I think that the modern monetary theory doesn't take us directly there. And so I think we need to say, well, that modern monetary theory isn't everything you need to know about economics. It's not everything you need to know about how alternative economic policies can be formulated. They need to be married to other social goals, such as creating a more equitable society. And there's no incompatibility between those two. So I'd say in that sense, MMT is necessary but not sufficient for addressing the problems that you refer to.
Okay, Wayne, have you got any comment on that one?
Not really, Peter. I think Frank's handled it very well. I think MMT creates the reasoning from MMT allows us to realise that anyone who wants a job can get a job. That there's no reason why people should live in poverty, why they should be unemployed. I think that's important to realise, and I think it gives us the means to be able to do that. And we have the power. We have the power of the purse to be able to do it. Some of the points that Frank has made here, I think, are valuable. MMT is not everything, but it certainly sets the parameters by which we can do something. It allows us to do that by the very fact of what the theory actually tells us can do. So I haven't much else to add to that.
Okay, well, the next point from Michael is about the jobs guarantee. So it says, I remain sceptical over a jobs guarantee program as a capitalist economy will exploit this program to further lower the bar of the quality of work. So I think, just a comment. I don't know if you want to respond to that, but there's obviously some sort of policy danger here.
Why don't you go first on this one, Wayne?
Thanks, Frank. Yes, look, a job guarantee can mean that you could be working and doing various different things. There's the amount of the different types of work that you could do under a job guarantee, which would probably be administered locally at the local government level through one organisation. It could even be, through a private sector organisation there that actually has work that needs to be done. There's a myriad of number of things that you can do there at a local level in creating work. I mean, it might even be working as a lifeguard, helping people to understand how to surf, so they're safe. You might be a surfie, and you might, be a very good swimmer. You know how to surf using a surfboard. You can help and give lessons to people there. The number of jobs and certain types of work you could be doing under a job guarantee program is just, mind-boggling. So I think there's a whole range of scope there. Personally, I'd like to see some jobs in sustainable industries, in green industries. There'd be work that could be done there. It depends, I guess, on the creativity of at the local area where people are setting up where the job guarantee programs will actually be, the operation of those programs will be carried out there in the local government areas through organisations. They may be non-profit organisations, they may not be. So there's a range of scope there for a whole range of different activities.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that last point is a very important one, that though a job guarantee would be centrally funded through the national government, it would be locally implemented, bearing in mind local employment conditions, local employment opportunities. And Stephanie Kelton, I notice, emphasises the need to emphasise the care economy as a sector where there's much necessary and socially useful work to be done.
Yeah.
It is bizarre to have people out of work involuntarily at a time when we do need so many more people in the care economy. I don't just mean here health or elderly people's care or disability services. They're important areas, but also the broader question of climate change, environmental sustainability. So much to be done. And there's no reason implicitly why the nature of the jobs provided by a government to otherwise unemployed people would be markedly inferior to private sector jobs. Indeed, in the areas that I've just described, one would think that as long as they were paid above minimum wages, or at the minimum wage at the very least, and if there was, attention given to directly servicing local needs, these could indeed be very admirable jobs. But one final thing I would say is that here is another debate opening up. Do we want a job guarantee for the otherwise involuntarily unemployed, or do we want a universal basic income for everyone? This isn't our topic for tonight, but you can see how discussions of these kind of topics quickly get broadened out.
Yeah.
The advocates of basic income, of which I'm one, say, well, let's recognise that in an affluent society, we can give everyone payments to keep them out of poverty, which aren't conditional upon being engaged in paid work.
Yeah.
If we are sufficiently affluent as a society to afford that, then we could perhaps have a government job guarantee scheme over and above it for people who want more than the basic income, and over and above that, of course, seeking more permanent jobs in the labour market, either in the public or private sectors. So in that way, you would think of the labour market as having four categories, from sort of basic income to job guarantee to private and public sector employment of a more ongoing basis.
Okay. Well, the next comment is from Steve Whale. It's more like a comment. Money is the root of all evil. Or perhaps it's more correct to say that greed is the cause of all evil. So I guess you don't have to comment yourselves, but how does this intersect with MMT? Does MMT have any impact on this conundrum in human character? Yeah.
I'm not sure how philosophical
You want to be.
this, but let me have a quick stab. I think it rubs glibly off the tongue. Money is the root of all evil, but an equal little epithet that I recall is from some American wit who once said, well, I've been poor and I've been rich, and believe you me, rich is better. Well, certainly getting out of poverty reliably makes people's lives better. If the use of money helps to achieve that goal, whether it's by government expenditure to promote job opportunities or however, that will create a society with higher material living standards, which particularly if linked then into basic income provision, would open up more freedom, more leisure, more opportunities for broadly fulfilling lives. So money, I don't think, is the root of the problem. It's a means to social progress if used wisely, both at the individual level and at the government level. Throwing money at things doesn't necessarily create good outcomes. You can buy rubbish goods yourself, and governments can spend in ways that involve other rubbish. Don't get me started on submarines. So the question of what the money is used for, whether privately or publicly, is, I think, more important than the presence or absence of that money.
Yeah. Okay, Wayne, any philosophical response? Or
I think Frank has handled very adequately, but I just like to say that it's not so much money; it's what's happening with the money, and it's just a means by which, to be able to have a decent standard of living and to be able to provide decent standard of living for people. So money's just a tool in a sense. Nobody wants to live in poverty. The means by which a society operates is that you have to have money. And of course, without the means of money, and through a modern monetary theory, you have a job guarantee. You have a government that creates, can spend. Money isn't the problem. It's real resources that are the problem. That's the problem. Do we have the real resources? And if we haven't got the real resources, can we import them? Can we get the resources that we need from somewhere else without creating inflation? So that's the real situation. It's not money. Money is just the means by which we can buy things in the economy. So I think Frank has handled that well. I have not much else to add.
Okay. Yeah. We've got 3 points here by Geoffrey Belcher. So I think we'll take them separately. The first one is about the job guarantee. What makes the job guarantee different from a work for the dole? Why not a UBI that will restore the worker's freedom to choose to work for oneself on one's terms, unless an employer makes a better offer? Yeah, so I don't know if we've actually addressed this one earlier on already. What about you?
Peter, could I take that one first?
Yeah.
Look, the argument between a universal basic income and a job guarantee has been around for a while. It's been debated before, and I think in terms of what people see, some people are looking at saying, okay, give people a universal basic income and they can do whatever they want with it. I think human beings need more than just a handout of money. And I think a job guarantee actually provides a whole range of psychosocial benefits that just handing money out to people and saying, here you are, here's a handout of money, you can do whatever you want with it. Not only that, I think also the social interaction of working with other people and doing something constructive is actually very beneficial for people psychologically. I think it also has impacts socially for our society in terms of having people there doing things together, working together and producing something together. It's more than just being given money and saying, here's the money, you can spend and do whatever you want with it. So to me, that's very important. Not only that, I think what it does also is a job guarantee also gets people to learn new skills. In a job guarantee program, you develop skills, you meet new people, you're doing different things. It opens up a whole new vista for new possibilities. You won't get that if you just handed out some money. And I think that a job guarantee also allows you to provide training, maybe to move into new fields. You can move into a new area. It's a job guarantee program doesn't have to be something where you're just going to stay there forever. The possibilities of being able to move into new employment somewhere else in the economy is always there. And of course, you're getting skills, you're learning something new, your self-esteem is being developed. It's a whole complete package, whereas just getting a benefit doled out of money is not helping you in any way. Where are you interacting with other people, learning communication, learning how to get along in society, learning something new that you wouldn't learn if you were just given an income. So to me, a job guarantee is superior to a universal basic income.
Okay, thank you. And Frank, will we go on or?
Just briefly, as I argued earlier, I don't think it has to be either or.
Yeah.
I think the work for the dole sort of authoritarian image of job guarantee is probably unjustified if there are other options. Of course, if governments withdrew all support from everyone, unless they did take the job offered to them under a job guarantee scheme, it would converge on work for the dole, but it doesn't have to be that way. And Wayne's quite right to stress the positive aspects of training, work experience that can help to create fuller lives and better economic opportunities down the track. So there's a lot of design issues involved here. It's not just a matter of saying I'm going to bat for this team or bat for that team. We have to think carefully in the event of having any influence over future government policies about just what sets of arrangements would maximise freedom, but also maximise opportunity for people to do socially useful things.
Okay, so next point of Joffre is, the other end of the spectrum. How does the MMT correct the highly inequitable global monetary situation where the derivatives market is 100 to 200 times the combined GDP of all nations? So again, we're into the inequality side of it probably, but
well, I'll have a quick first stab at that one because, again, it's on my recurrent theme that this is a bit like Julia Gillard talking about sexism. Yes, it wasn't everything, but it was certainly something.
There.
MMT doesn't solve all problems. A terribly sort of speculative international financial architecture is out there, and it's games that rich people play with potentially very unstable consequences for the world economy. And I don't think individual governments practicing MMT will change that. I don't think so. I don't see why it should do so, logically. But there are other policies that could. The so-called Tobin tax proposals have been around for a long period of time. A very small rate of tax applied on international monetary transactions of those kind would at least throw some grit in the wheels of international finance to try and also generate revenue, which can be used for international social purposes, such as increased aid for developing countries and so on. So there are other policies that are perfectly compatible with a modern monetary approach to increasing fiscal space within national economies. But these other policy areas requiring international agreements around things such as the Tobin tax.
Okay. And Wayne, have you got any comment on that one?
I agree with Frank that a Tobin tax is very good. I think in terms of being a sovereign currency issuer, we do have some control over what we can do. But as Frank said, there are limitations in terms of that. We really are restricted, I guess. It depends on different countries, whether they have full monetary sovereignty or not, on that spectrum that I mentioned earlier, what they can do and what they can't do. Obviously, if you're a country like the USA, you've got a little bit more power than if you're a country like, for example, El Salvador or some smaller country like that. So I think it depends. We probably need to look at, organisations in terms of a world, looking at, international organisations to deal with problems of that nature. However, we can, MMT does allow us to have control over our currency to some extent. But Frank is correct in saying that there are some problems there with that. And I think we have to be aware of the fact that we're in an international monetary system, and capital flows are moving all the time. Hot money's going everywhere. So it is a bit difficult to be able to control what's happening from an international point of view.
Okay, thank you. Now, the third point from Joffrey is a real obscure to me, but anyway, he says, then what will stop communities from replicating the Wargle experiment of 1931, where a town near Vienna or in Vienna lifted itself out of the Great Depression without help from the government or the central bank? Are either of you aware of this WORGL experiment?
Well, I certainly haven't, Peter. I haven't heard of it, I have to say that.
Okay.
I'm not sure if it's a Germanic particular policy that was formulated, or whether it was in a particular state over in Germany, or Frank might have some idea about that. Yeah.
No, I don't know this historical experience, but I think there's plenty of evidence that cities with governments progressive governments can do a lot to create more economic opportunities, particularly during times when recessions are threatened. But they don't have the capacity to issue a fiat or sovereign currency like a national government does.
Yeah.
And that means they're somewhat more restricted. But good things can be done. I mean, working with local businesses, creating local government enterprises to build infrastructure, do useful social works. Yeah. There's plentiful examples. I mean, we talked, for example, about the original New Deal policies of the Franklin Delano Roosevelt period in the 1930s in the USA. I mean, it's popularly thought of as sort of a top-down program of job creation by the national government. Well, a lot of it was very bottom-up. It was local activism, local communities getting together, demanding particular types of work and making provision for those things to happen locally. Like most things in politics, a good dose of bottom-up processes is always important alongside the top-down stuff.
Okay, that's good. We can check out with Joffrey what he meant later. The next point comes from Michael again. With capitalism increasingly gearing itself to rolling global crises, for instance, proxy wars, pandemic, climate change, does MMT have a role in economic recovery and reform, or is it really another policy to co-opt? So this is, again, a more political question.
Co-opt.
That's an interesting question there, Peter. Obviously, capitalism is a system. It's which has international ramifications. When we're talking about modern monetary theory, we're talking about a sovereign currency issuer, and we're talking about sovereign currency users. When we're talking about the international monetary system, that's another issue altogether. But I think having control over your currency at a national level certainly provides you with a great more power to do more things. And you can actually, you're sort of barricaded in a sense by some of the ravages of the international monetary system by being a sovereign currency issuer. If you have full, depending on that spectrum where you've got full sovereign currency capacity. So I would say that you're probably better off if you do have that. You're able to make a much more, you're able to sustain a better internally economic or domestic policy position than you are if you don't. Okay. Frank might have something he might wish to add.
I'll make a sort of a parallel point about Green New Deal. I mean, Green New Deal doesn't smash capitalism. Green New Deal sort of steers capitalism down a road that will be better for a sustainable future. More green jobs, less climate change problems. but still capitalism. My advocacy of a Green New Deal sees it as a process rather than an end point. In other words, once you started this process, other political opportunities can open up. I mean, political threats will open up very predictably. There'll be capitalist interests that feel threatened by this, most obviously in the mining sector. And one can expect that the likes of Gina Rinehart would use their phenomenal wealth to try to steer the political system away from the embrace of Green New Deal type policies. Well, that's rather interesting that Rupert Murdoch, at least ostensibly, has suddenly changed his tune. But I also on the political left, I would think there's people, you know, good out and out environmentalists who say this just isn't good enough. What about the steady state economy? What about the circular economy? What about moving more radically to something that's genuinely sustainable and not driven by capitalist imperatives? I say, right on, comrade. But how do we get from here to there? So the question then is, does a Green New Deal provide a stepping stone to a more radical environmentalism, a more egalitarian society? In the absence of any other viable alternatives for a more quick revolutionary transformation, it seems to me to be the best bet. So this for me is the politics of the MMT too. It expands the scope of what can be done within capitalism rather than transforming it in and of itself. But once you've gone down that road, you build up some social expectations, you have uncertain impacts on the political process itself, which then we just have to surf the
try to write it
as it comes.
Okay, I've got a question from Peter Ross, simpler one. What are the differences between Keynesianism and MMT?
Well, I've got a bit of steam up. I'll pick straight on that if I may, Wayne, because there's a lot in common. Keynesianism has always recognised that you can offset the cyclical character of a capitalist economy with enlightened public policy. Indeed, Keynesianism is a way of understanding the automatic stabilisers that result from government policies. If governments give out payments to the unemployed, and if they take taxes more from the rich than from the poor, an economic downturn will necessarily give rise to a growing budgetary deficit. Keynesians say good. And monetary theorists likewise say good. In fact, let's go further down that road and do not just the automatic stabilizers, but do discretionary policies that further pumps up the employment opportunities, the economic redistribution from rich to poor, and so on. So I regard modern monetary theory as having its roots in a Keynesian view of the economy, but further extending Keynesian theory into ways in which expenditure can be ramped up to meet social needs.
Okay, we've got we've got 6 more minutes. So Wayne, would you like to comment a little bit more on that general point?
I'd just like to say that modern monetary theory has come out of post-Keynesianism, and of course, and probably from Kalecki in Marxism there, and so it allows it. It gives us a pretty broad understanding of what we can do and what we can't do in terms of the economy. I think, as Frank is saying, it gives us a little bit more leeway than probably the old-fashioned Keynesianism did, because it allows us to spend more. We realise that we've got control over our currency, so it gives us a bit more power there in that sense. I don't think I can add any more than what Frank has actually said. I think he's said most of what I would be thinking about myself. Yeah.
Okay, so now got a comment from Lorez Vera. She says, sorry, but neither speaker sounds like they've ever had to live on a basic wage. A job is not a good in itself if it means you ruin your health working by continuing to struggle from pay to pay. So this is really about the character of either the job guarantee or the UBI.
Could I speak on that
Can I
further?
just go a bit further? There's one, Steve Whale then says, pretty hard to make ends meet on $300 a week.
Yeah.
It's time for a living wage paid regardless of working or study. Okay, go for it, Wayne.
First of all, I'd like to say that I understand what it's like to be unemployed and to be working on low wages. I left school at 15 and I worked in factories in the upholstery industry. I was doing the work of an adult at age 17 and getting 17-year-old wages. They didn't pay adult wages until you were 21. I think what the job guarantee program provides is a decent wage. It's set at a minimum wage. You can't, and also you have all the other provisions that are needed. You get superannuation, you've got leave, the whole range of different things there. So the job guarantee program actually is an anchor. It's also an inflation anchor as well. And it also provides meaningful work for people at a decent wage. Of course, you don't have to do that. I mean, you don't have to take up a job if you don't want it in the job guarantee program. But I think that the range of work that would be available throughout various different councils and throughout different states would encourage most people to want to work under those circumstances. The working conditions would be standard working conditions, or even better than probably some of the working conditions that are out there at the moment in terms of casual work and in different sectors. So I think that, in fact, what it does, the job guarantee actually sets a wage anchor, and it makes the private sector actually have to, if they're paying below that wage anchor, they have to either, to get the people to come across, they have to offer a wage which is higher, or an equal wage and more interesting work, or something which is going to sway people to come out of the job guarantee program. So that job guarantee program is absolutely vital to modern monetary theory. And I think it's essential that people understand that. I know what it's like to be unemployed when I was a teenager and as a young adult. So I understand all the sorts of things that go with unemployment.
Thanks, Wayne.
Yeah.
Frank, have you got some?
Can I just add that again? I think the modern monetary theory approach here is necessary, but certainly not sufficient. If we're facing problems of wage stagnation, as we have been for the last decade, if we're facing a growing precariat of people in insecure jobs, casual jobs, jobs that are on call, maybe tomorrow, maybe not. There's nothing in this particular approach to economics that solves those problems. That's why you need comprehensive programs of progressive public policy. Just one lever ain't gonna cut it. You need, as Keynes himself would have said, you need all the policy instruments in the armory and more if you're going to try to create a good society. So necessary but not sufficient is the theme that's running through my head in just about every aspect when dealing with these questions on modern monetary theory.
Okay, thank you. We're coming to the end. There's a few more comments. I think I'll read a few out because they're witty, also some different ones. So Steve Whale says, could we be forced into working for the dole? And that dole payment could be 1/1,000,000th of a Bitcoin in the future. Ha, ha, ha. Another is, I have some bonds myself. I'll sell them to the government so that I can get the dole into the future, but not going to work for it. We're not going to take it. I think there's a general thing here. Believe in people. Give them money. They'll do something useful with it. Don't think you have to control it. This one's a bit more interesting. Bearing in mind the negative view of taxation by Australians, for example, inheritance taxes, carbon tax, etc., how would you overcome this when it comes to the time to reduce inflation by increased taxation? Don't have to answer it, but I think these are the things. So we've come to the 7:15, and I'd like to thank once again, both Wayne and Frank for a very, very interesting evening. And thank you for the work you put into these presentations and the answers you've given. And thank you to all those people who've really been provoked, I think, and really written some very interesting points. Another one, UBI is not, in capital letters, a dole. Okay. We're on the way with a lot of this policy thinking, I think. But this is the last session of Politics in the Pub for 2021. And I know it's been a very strange year for all of us. I want to thank everyone who's taken part in Politics in the Pub this year. Our first session in 2022, and all being well, it will be live at Hotel Harry, will be Tuesday, February 1. And we know an election is coming. We've got to plan our program, and we hope we'll put it together and be able to post it on our websites early in December. So please put February 1 in your diaries if you can now, and you can get more connected to Politics in the Pub through the Facebook group. So Sydney Politics in the Pub Facebook group, and everything we organise, you'll get a notification of that. And the video of tonight and all of our other programs is available on our website, politicsinthepub.org.au, which connects to our YouTube channel. So thank you very much to Wayne McMillan and Frank Stilwell. Thank you to Kathy Vogan for handling all of this tech side of it. And thank you to all the participants. Good night for 2021. Okay.
Yeah, see you next year, everybody. Bye.